All right, so today we go into Revelation 14 through 20. Last week, I almost wanted to try to jive through these and like kind of speed race through them, but I looked up after a certain point and it was already time to go. So we're coming back for Revelation 14, but Revelation 14 is really an interesting chapter in the book of Revelation because we saw as the book fit together, right? We went through the seal judgments. Well, actually, let's go all the way back. We went to the vision of Christ. We went through the the church age and the 7 churches that Jesus addressed. Right? And then we went through the heavenly scene and saw the four living creatures and the 24 elders, and John is weeping, and there's just the little lamb comes forth, and he's got 7 horns and 7 eyes, and oh my goodness, it's so strange and unusual. And then we saw the 7 sealed document, right? The title deed to planet Earth, and that gets opened up, and Christ is the one who's opening up these seals, and the 7th seal opens up, and it's the 7 trumpets, and the 7 trumpets come forth, and these are like the battle trumpets, the declaring the Lord's victory. So all of this is just marching forward, and then we went into that break around with 11 and the 2 witnesses and introducing some of the different people, actually 10 in the little book. And so we kind of got a break from what's going on in 12, and then 12 talked about the woman who's clothed as the sun, and the child she bears, which is Jesus. So the woman was Israel, and the child she bears is Jesus. And the dragon, right, is there trying to devour him, is thrown down from heaven. And then we got the beast from the earth, which is the Antichrist, and the beast from the sea, who we refer to as the false prophet. And then chapter 14 started off with that lamb and the 144,000 doing a victory dance. I mean, loosely put, right? And we saw that breaks the chronology. It's proleptic was the word that we use. It is looking in the midway point of the tribulation, just as things are about to get real bad towards the end. And that's going to be important because we'll note that it keeps commenting, kind of bouncing back and forth from the end, reminding us, the readers, and particularly the people in that tribulation period, that at the end of all this, God is victorious. Christ is victorious. And that's what brings us into this situation, right? It's encouraged in verse 13. It's encouraging those believers, saying, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works to follow them. So now all of a sudden, you are blessed if you're dead. Mm-hmm. Like, getting killed is the best thing that can happen to you. Pretty rough. I mean, only for those who are in the Lord, obviously. So we got this really dark situation. And we're going to see that 14 through the end of 20, what we're going to look at today, is also proleptic, looking at the end from the middle, from the standpoint of the middle. So that's where we're going. Does someone want to volunteer to read 14 through 20? And we'll slice and dice them a little bit.
Real quick, what did you talk about last week as far as the identity of Babylon the Great?
We talked for some length on it. But essentially, we went from the Tower of Babel through the Babylon and Daniel, and then moved forward into the reality that there will be an actual rebuilding of the city of Babylon, most likely, and then that there's both economic Babylon as well as spiritual Babylon. So, I can forward you the recording. It's up online.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. So that was the declared end of Babylon, right? All this is going on. And we keep in mind that we've just still got a fair bit of Revelation to go. Like, this is all just kind of reminding the people who are going through the middle that the end is coming, and that ultimately it's a good ending for believers. It's a good ending for God and His glory. But hopefully it also reminds us, and this is really important, that sin is a big deal. We sit here on this side of the cross knowing that our sin is paid for, and it can become a temptation to think that, oh, well, that was easy for God to take care of. That's just not that big a deal. But the truth of the matter is, first and foremost, sin put Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on the cross. It's a big deal that God himself, the second person of the Trinity, was the only one that could satisfy, could pay for the horror, the grievous nature of sin. And the truth of the matter is that everybody who rejects Christ now and in this time to come is truly accepting that they are going to pay or take the full penalty of the sin. And it's awful. It's just really, really bad, right? And that's valuable for us to recognize that, one, God dealing with sin at the cross was an incredible mercy beyond our full comprehension. And if we choose to reject that payment, then there is nothing left but the most fearsome judgment. And that judgment is justified because of the righteous character of God. And it's kind of odd to think that, well, God is certainly, immeasurably, eternally compassionate. It's part of his character, that ultimately it comes to the point where he has to, because of his righteousness, judge sin. And so as we look through these horrifying judgments and horrific events of the tribulation period, we note that it's not because of God. It's because of man's sin. It's because sin has to be dealt with, punished, and ultimately eliminated. So it's a more than a reasonably big deal for us to note and remember that this isn't angry God throwing a temper tantrum. This is the just and righteous, loving, gracious God who has forheld his punishment and forheld his judgment and forheld his wrath for so long, but he simply cannot do it and be true to his character forever unless we accept that payment of Christ. And it's important to note, as we saw in our previous study, that those who take the mark are not going to do so by accident. They're not going to go, well, maybe, I'm 50-50. And we kind of talked about this, but the vaccine is such an interesting thing as it goes out, because everybody has thoughts and feelings and ideas, and no one's 100% sure. Should I take it? Should I not? Should I not have taken it? Should I? And, everyone, we might pretend to be fully convinced one way or the other, but the truth of the matter is we don't know. And so hopefully we're gracious with one another. And that's not going to be at all what the mark of the beast is like. The mark of the beast will be an open statement. I rebel against God, I reject God, and I am actively attaching myself to his enemy, the Antichrist, and all that the Antichrist stands for, which is Satan. So it's probably one of the reasons why I get so uncomfortable, even though I have strong feelings about the vaccine and all that, just like everyone else does. I get uncomfortable with people comparing it to this eschatological event, the mark of the beast, because it's not an appropriate comparison. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be we don't know, we're going to play your odds, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think it's fair to say we're all doing to one degree or another when it comes to that. It's not a comparison to what the mark of the beast is going to be like. The mark of the beast will be an absolute statement on the behalf of everyone who takes it that they are permanently rejecting God, and there's no turning back at that point, as we saw. That is the one time that we can know for sure that a person is beyond help, beyond aid. There's no point. There's no ability for repentance. Now, would they want to is an even more odd question. But whatever the case, that is a watershed moment. And I would say, as we put teaching online and stuff, if you're going through the tribulation, if we're all gone, this is something that you want to take seriously. But we saw that God won't allow them not to take it seriously. We got angels flying through the heavens, declaring this, shouting this message out. So again, God makes sure that there's going to be no one going, oh man, I just had one too many beers last night. I came home with this mark on my hand. It won't be like that, right? It'll be an intentional act. So now, we finish chapter 14 with that seriousness in mind and following out of that. So someone want to read 14 through 20?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling out with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is ripe. Then he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, and he also had a sharp sickle. Then another angel, the one who has power over fire, came out from the altar, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Put in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, because her grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle to the earth and gathered the clusters from the vine of the earth, and threw them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out from the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia.
Excellent. So, we need to remind ourselves again where we're at. And this is a big deal, because Revelation is chronologically very comprehensible. But we will also want to recognize that there are these moments, these pictures that are outside, that draw us outside of the chronology, right? And so when we're looking at this chapter, and as it closes up and moves into the next point, the bowl judgments, right? That it is that look towards the end that is going on. We're going to talk about the Battle of Armageddon a little bit today. We won't go as in depth into it as we will later in our study. But we want to recognize that, as we've said, some 70% of the book of Revelation is drawing from directly Old Testament imagery, and this is one of those big times when Old Testament imagery is being drawn upon. This is also an interesting passage, because it's another one of the places that people who seek to find a rapture elsewhere than before the tribulation, they'll often look here, and we'll see why that is ridiculously inappropriate. But interestingly, it tends to come from people who only study the Bible in English, and it tends to come from people who don't have a firm grasp of the Old Testament prophecy and what's being put forth. So just to kind of give an idea of what this is talking about, if I talk to you about a gathering crowd of people who are all seated in a church, and a woman walks down in a beautiful white dress, and she meets a man what am I describing? A wedding. I didn't say wedding. There were just those certain context clues, like the woman in the white dress, that you went, oh, that's what that is. That's a wedding. Well, we're going to see that the picture of this sickle, of this harvest, has very specific imagery that's attached to it. And that's one, why we would say that finding the rapture here is a bit ridiculous. But two, most importantly, it gives us a key to the nature of what this event is. So we would point out that as we look at this Son of Man, right? It says, "Then I looked, and behold, on a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having his head a golden crown, and his hand a sharp sickle." So to understand this Son of Man, we obviously could look at many passages. Ezekiel talks about it. The Lord, some 70 plus times in the Gospels, refers to himself as the Son of Man, right, as a messianic title. But let's go to Daniel 7 real quick. Daniel 7, 13 and 14. And we'll see where very likely John is kind of drawing this imagery from, or that much like we talked about describing a wedding without saying the word wedding, this picture would draw Old Testament saints directly to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and following says, "I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, in his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed." So, if you were to place that vision that Daniel had somewhere on our Revelation timeline, where would you put it?
He's given the kingdom, so we're at the end.
Yeah.
tribulation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Daniel here is describing the ultimate end of the tribulation and beginning of the millennial kingdom, and that's a timeline marker, if you like, to find out where this vision is. It's not fitting chronologically into the middle of the tribulation. It's looking forward, like we saw, to the end. Jewish interpreters have always viewed this as being a messianic figure. Conservative Christian interpreters the like. So John's audience knew that this was the Messiah, second coming. This is a picture of that end of the tribulation. Let's go next to Psalm 21, 3 through 4. Psalm 21, 3 through 4, again, continuing all of the Psalms very frequently having this kingdom psalm idea. And this is definitely one of such passages. Ben, you already there?
Psalm 21, 3 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
For you meet him with the blessings of good things. You set a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked for life from you. You gave it to him. Length of days forever and ever.
Excellent. So here's this picture of this crowned one, right? And this is a Psalm of David. So this is the promise of the Davidic covenant. This is David speaking prophetically towards this one who would be crowned with a golden crown. So again, this Old Testament imagery that is just jumping out of this picture is the Messianic King. He's coming to take his place. And again, it's exactly what people going through the tribulation will need to hear and know. Our last Old Testament passage that we'll flip to is Joel 3, 12 through 13. And Joel is one of those minor prophets who's not minor at all. He's incredibly important, particularly in prophesying the day of the Lord and the tribulation and the difficulties and horrors of the tribulation. So, what do we got here? Steve, do you have it?
Yep. Let the nations be aroused and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great.
Now that's pretty direct, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we could hold these passages, and we're holding these passages side by side. We say, well, that's two people talking about the same event, right? The sickle is there, that picture of a sickle being swept in judgment. And this is important that if we're going to try to see a rapture in this time, we'd have to find some place where harvesting with a sharp sickle is anything but a terribly negative sign of judgment or horrifying, judgment of the righteousness and the wrath of God. So to make that the rapture event, it just doesn't quite hold the reason. The timing's wrong, the imagery's wrong, and the vibe given by this kind of picture is wrong as well. So, I mean, hopefully, if the only other thing or another thing we could add to put that just argument to rest once and for all is that we have two Greek words that are both translated as ripe. So there's a word in 15 that is translated as ripe, and then there's another one that in the New King James in verse 18 it says fully ripe. It seems like the NASB had ripe for both of them. Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you have? What are you working with?
This is New American Standard.
So that'll be the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, it's difficult. Translating is always difficult, and especially there's the old the old gag that Eskimos or Inuit tribes had some 20 words for snow, right? Because snow was such an important part of their lives that you had, and it's kind of funny because we do too. We have sleet and snow and powder, and we have all different ways of viewing it. So it's not as silly or not as outlandish as it sounds, I guess. But this is an agrarian culture, so they had more than one word for ripe. So the word translated ripe in 15 is actually the idea of a bad harvest, like an overripe harvest, like a winter harvest, a withered harvest. So it's the idea that it's ripe, but it's a disappointing time. It's just not a great harvest is kind of the sense of this word. Now the word used in 18 is fully, or translated here is in the New King James, is fully ripe. That's like, ooh, the right exact moment. So it would be odd to me to talk about the rapture of the church, the blessed hope of the believer, as a withered harvest, as a disappointing harvest, right? It just doesn't make sense. But what we're going to see is, as this is kind of previewing, it's a preview. It's previewing the Battle of Armageddon. One of the things that we oftentimes misunderstand is, did anybody, or am I, no, you would have seen Armageddon with Bruce Willis, right? The movie about the asteroid coming down to Earth. It was anyway, you saw it too? Yep, okay. The word Armageddon was used in that movie for what reason? Why would they call that movie Armageddon?
End times.
Yeah, because ultimately the asteroid was threatening to end Earth, right? But more importantly, it was probably just chosen because it was a vivid idea of, again, at the end of days. And so we'll talk about, sometimes used culturally or see culturally, Armageddon spoken of as if it's, the entire end times event or something vague. But Armageddon is actually a very specific set of battles. It's not a battle of Armageddon. It's the campaign of Armageddon with, debatably 6 and sometimes more stages to it. So it's not just a one and you're done, that's Armageddon. And it's certainly not a generic term for the end times. You would not, biblically speaking, say, oh, well, that's the tribulation period. We sometimes call it Armageddon. No. Armageddon is that specific battle, actually referring to Har Megiddo, as the Valley of Megiddo, if you like. And it has to do with the place in which that final huge battle is going to take place, that one that is 600 furlongs or stadia, or however else we might measure space. But we want to note that this is talking about a multi-stage battle. And so that kind of gives us some reason as to why there might be 2 reapings here. Right? There's going to be early stages of the battle where the Antichrist is going to experience defeat, and then there's the final stage that is the great battle of Armageddon, wherein the blood is, rising to the level of the horses' bridles, and that's the real dramatic moment of Christ's victory. But we note that there's several stages, and so this double reaping isn't really that strange. So, hopefully all those factors put to bed any wild idea that this could be a rapture passage. It just doesn't fit in tone, doesn't fit in space, doesn't fit in the time, and furthermore, it would be an odd space in the letter to drop it in, because we're in sort of a parenthetical kind of look forward, look back, look at the main characters, look at the full spiritual battle from way back, the whole thing. So it's a very tenuous attempt, and the reason why, especially people who advocate for a mid-tribulational rapture, is because there just isn't a place for it, right? The 2 witnesses is another one that they'll use, but boy, that doesn't fit at all. 2 witnesses is a figure for the church. Like, the word witness is similar, but after that, nothing's similar. They're calling down Old Testament level judgments. That can't be the church. We don't have the ability to do that. Unless, do you? Man, if you have the ability to call down, fire and hail and all the other wonderful things, we should be using that.
Definitely.
We should, yes.
I would be using
It definitely would be used.
Daily.
Yeah.
It would be, in fact.
I'd be looking for reasons to use it.
That's right. Guy stole my parking spot.
Cut me off.
And then the fact that they lie on the streets 3 days of this, specifically of Jerusalem. I mean, it just, again, none of the imagery, even if it is imagery, we don't believe it's imagery. We believe it's 2 literal people, 2 men who will do this. But I just want to point out that you can tell that people are really grasping when they start taking vague and really unmatching pictures to try to fit that in. So, again, then I looked, and behold, right, I saw this white cloud, as we saw. So here's a picture. The one sitting one like a son of man, clearly Jesus Christ the Messiah, is an end times picture that we'll see more fully or graphically displayed in chapter 19. says, on his head he has a golden crown. Now this is interesting because Jesus will, of course, be the one who is crowned with many crowns, right? He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So he is worthy as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords to wear a diadem, but this is actually a victor's crown. So this gold crown is a wreath crown. It's a Stephanos crown that denotes his role as the victor, as the one in whom we are also as an overcomer, in whom we are also overcomers, right? And he has in his hand this sharp sickle, again, a clear Old Testament picture of judgment. And this is another angel, right, came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud. So we notice here is another angel. Why is it another angel? Because we've just had 3 angels, and so now we're getting another angel. So we get the idea that this is a common angel, and the word angelos, or translated angel, really means messenger. So sometimes that's an angelic messenger, sometimes that's a human messenger. I would argue that the messengers in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, well, 1, 2, and 3, that are the stars in his hand, are actually human messengers that will carry the message. This, however, is an angelic messenger because angels carry messages. He's coming out of the temple. Now, we know that we can presume based on the context that he's not coming out of the earthly temple, the one that has been desecrated, the one that the Antichrist has designed to set up now and to worship himself or demanded worship for himself in. He's coming out of the heavenly temple, the abode of God, if you like, where God is living. And he comes out of that temple with a message. So what is this a picture of? Is this an angel bossing Jesus around? Probably not, right?
I think so.
I don't think so. But what we have here is, I believe, an image of the angel coming out of the heavenly temple, the true and perfect temple, the righteous and holy temple, to deliver a message from God the Father, who designates and sets all the times to God the Son.
Oh, okay.
Right? So it's a nature of the function. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is not less than God the Father, and this Holy Spirit is not less than God the Father or God the Son, and so on and so forth, right? They exist in absolute triunity and equality, and they share that single divine essence, and yet there are differences in function. And so the God the Father is the one who declares times and seasons. So here this angel is coming and telling Jesus, just as he is now waiting, right, to go for the Father to say, go get your bride, go rapture the church, the time has come. Jesus is again waiting in that right relationship between God the Father and God the Son to be told, now's the time to go and carry out the final judgment, or for the second coming. So he's crying out with a loud voice. So it's a very graphic picture, right? This angel comes walking out of the holy heavenly temple to holler at this one who's at the crowd, screaming, shouting out, thrust in your sickle and reap. The time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And as we saw, this is that picture of the withered harvest. So this is a picture of a judgment going on. It says, and he who sat on the cloud and thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. So this is that picture of, we could possibly equate it to the first phases of the campaign of Armageddon, but it seems that this is sort of 2 beautiful pictures of the judgment, the final judgment that's coming at the end of the tribulation period. So then we have another angel come out of the temple in heaven, and he also has a sharp sickle. So this shouldn't be new to us either, right? The angel is here going to execute the judgment of God, right? So he comes out, and it's another angel comes out of the altar who had the power over fire, and who cried out with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle. So now this third angel is coming along and delivering a message. He says, thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So what we're looking at here, right, is a grape harvest very specifically, and the grapes are just right. Now, grape harvests, of course, in Israel were just a huge deal, and you can't just harvest the grapes on October 15th every year. You have to wait until the grapes are perfectly ripe and ready to be harvested. And that's what essentially he's saying. At the end of the tribulation period, when the tribulation finally comes to an end, it will be the time of absolute ripeness. Can you think of another time? And by the way, the ripeness here is the fullness of the iniquity, right? The fullness is finally coming in. Can you think of another time when the Lord allowed iniquity to get fully ripe before judging it?
The Ammonites?
Yeah. Expound upon that a little bit for us.
The iniquity of the Ammonites with Israel.
Mm-hmm. So God tells Abraham, right? Your people, your children will have this land, but I'm going to send you into Egypt. Very much paraphrasing. I'm going to send you into Egypt because the iniquity of the Ammonites is not yet full. Isn't that something? Saying it hadn't reached the point where it deserved the fullness of judgment of the conquest generation.
Yeah, that's isn't that in Genesis 15 where he's saying your offspring will be strangers in a land that's not theirs for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So he even gives a time frame to it.
Yeah, he knew exactly when. But interestingly, and this is amazing, right? This shows that that mysterious relationship between the foreknowledge of God and yet also so he knew it was going to come to an end. So why not just end it there? He's still allowing them to exercise that free will. Just knowing that was going to happen didn't mean that he would preemptively judge that it was going to happen. He allowed them to make that free choice on their own and thus awaited that time. And I would put forth even the idea, when we talk about the iniquity of the Ammonites being full, I believe that part of that is that he was waiting for the time when no one could yet be saved from that culture. And then he was going to pour out judgment, meaning that there would be godly people and ungodly people, and then over time, as the ungodly people became all that was left, there was nothing left to do but judge, right? Seem fair? What happened in the time of Noah? Was it not the same thing? Mm-hmm. Got to the point where all that was righteous on the earth was who?
Noah and his family.
8 people.
Yeah.
Right? That's a small number, given that there were probably billions on the earth at that time.
Wow.
There was just that many. So what does God do? Judge. He judged. He preserved his saints. He preserved the few who were righteous. But the point is that the tragic reality of the moral and spiritual entropy is that it ultimately gathers to this point of absolute nothing left to be done. God can't interact with it any way other than to judge it, to wipe it off the earth, kind of as in the days of Noah, sort of an issue being pointed out here. So we could look at Sodom and Gomorrah and other places that just got to the point where it was so extreme that God said, nope, that's all. And interestingly, God in his patience, love, and forbearance was willing to wait until that time comes. And so when we come to the end of the tribulation period, what are we going to have? Well, there's going to be the remnant of Israel on the earth. There's going to be a small and ever diminishing number of believers who are being martyred and persecuted and destroyed. All right? And then there's going to be this fever pitch point where all the enemies of God and all the people who have opposed God are fully ripe for nothing but judgment.
That's interesting in mentioning Sodom and Gomorrah, because Abram is asking even if there's, he dwindles down to, 5 at the end, 10
Mm-hmm.
at the very end?
Yeah, 10 more.
If there's even 10 righteous, and God's like, I will.
Mm-hmm.
If there's even 10 righteous, I'll hold off. That's interesting.
Yeah, which is really fascinating, because I think Abraham was resting easy. He thought he'd kept the judgment from coming, because 10, that's just Lot and his family. Mm-hmm. That's just Lot and all his kids is 10. Mm-hmm. Lot, his wife, and the kids. And yet even among the kids and grandkids and whoever else was there, they couldn't find 10. All that escaped was who? Lot, his wife, and the 2 daughters. Mm-hmm. And then his wife, she got all salty. Oh. I'm going to have to answer for that someday.
That was a sin right there.
That wasn't. And the worst part is it wasn't even a good joke. Anyway.
I kind of saw it coming.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I
was
saw
waiting when you said something.
That's one. So anyway, the point being, right, that the Lord continues to show this pattern of He allows wickedness to go so far, and then finally says enough, and that's His patience, His forbearance, His grace to wait until such time. And so here, this angel is involved in the judgment as well. It says, so the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and the blood came up to the winepress, up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. So, has any of us ever seen, it's about 184 miles. Have any of you ever seen an old school wine press or how wine was made in the ancient world? On the right day, you'd go out and cut all the grapes and cut all the grapes and cut all the grapes, and you had this big vat that you'd throw in there, and then everybody would get their sandals off and put their dirty feet all over the stuff you were going to drink. Don't understand that. Historically, I feel like they could have found just a more hygienic way to make wine, but it was fast, right? Or it was fast comparatively to the process. So this picture of, and actually there's skip at the illustrations. The point is, you got this big kind of vat type structure, right? And then you got everyone in there pounding and smashing and stamping on the grapes, and as you're doing that, it's all splashing up and going around. And it's probably a joyous picture because it's a harvest time picture at some level. But here we're seeing that it's a statement of absolute judgment. So when we come to the issue of the valley, or this judgment rather, the biblical Armageddon is the Valley of Megiddo, which is where all the satanic forces are going to align themselves. And the final stage in the campaign takes place at the Valley of Jehoshaphat, or the Kidron Valley. And Jesus at this point, right, it's going to be such a bloodbath that, and we can only imagine, right, as we're going to look at this in greater detail later, but Jesus Christ is going to defeat them with the sword of his mouth, and it is going to be such a gory and horrific affair that, we talk about streets running with blood. Well, the world is going to run with blood such that it's splashing up to be as high as a horse's bridle, some 4 to 5, maybe even 6 feet off the ground. That's a pretty violent thing. And it's kind of interesting to note that Jesus crossed this same valley in what we call the triumphal entry, right? You see Jesus comes over the hill and he's weeping over Jerusalem. And I wonder if part of the reason he's weeping is he knows what's going to happen years later in that valley. The horrifying judgment of man because of our rebellion, our rejection, our sinfulness, right? He knows that ultimately the result of sin is absolute and utter destruction at the hands of a righteous God. The valley will be filled with soldiers. And, I always think it's sad in a modern war situation or warfare situation, because most soldiers are just doing what they're told, right? They're going to the place where their superior officer told them to go and to fight a battle that they may or may not have a full understanding of why they're there or why they're risking or even giving their lives. But this is an interesting situation because every one of these soldiers will have permanently aligned themselves with Satan. They will be standing before the Son of God, and this judgment will come upon them absolutely justly. And God will annihilate all those who attack him. So the Jews will recognize that it is God alone that saved them, and ultimately we see that he is faithful to keep or to preserve his holy people. So this moment, looking forward, right, is about God's faithfulness to intervene and protect his people. He's going to protect faithful Israel, right? There's going to be quite an amount of time leading up to that battle. But the good thing, and what we mentioned in kind of closing up this study, is that we, thankfully, will be spared entirely from this time. This horrible time of judgment on the earth, we are spared, but not because we are better, wiser, smarter, kinder, more moral, more ethical, but because of all of God's wrath for sin was poured out upon Jesus Christ. It is because we are in him who will come back and judge and have received the forgiveness of him who will come back to judge that we do not get what we deserve. And that's a blessed hope indeed. That's why we can look at all of the trials and difficulties and fears of this world and say that we know where our hope is and we know what is coming for us. So that's about what I have to say. Does anybody, any other comments about this?
I think it's weird that there's this other angel is coming in swinging the sickle.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't it Jesus there? I wonder.
Yeah.
I don't know. It
Well,
seems odd to me.
It is really interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I mean, I believe that both sickle swings, both Jesus' sickle swing in 14 and then the angelic sickle swing are, we might call them symbolic, right? So we know that Jesus will come back with us, his saints, as well as his angels, and the angels will be taking part in that judgment. So it might be a way to point out that, well, everything that Jesus does and delegates to his angelic hosts is done by him, but it also, could show that, and actually it's one of the things that truly excites me, because now we are largely unaware of angelic and demonic movement, right? We can maybe have some horrifying encounters, or various people have claimed to have various encounters with angels, and I won't be the one to say one way or the other. But in the time leading up to, it's just as we saw at the beginning of chapter 14, in the time of the millennial kingdom, there will be active, visible angelic action and movement. It's going to be truly, like, we're going to return in tow behind Christ with angels, and they're going to be a part of, we're going to see these judgments take place, and really throughout the tribulation period, right, we're going to see pretty consistent angelic intervention and involvement. And so I would argue that that's going on now, that the Lord is using his angels to complete his purpose and purposes here on earth at this moment, and opposing satanic forces and the like. But it's really interesting that as we get close to the end, as this ramps up, there's even more awareness of what the angels are doing. So, yeah, I think that's kind of why, just pointing, if there is a why, other than just to say that, that the angelic involvement in this judgment will be significant, is my guess. Who knows what it'll be to the naked eye as well. It could literally be this, imagine this huge, what did I say, 184 mile, filled with soldiers. And they just start popping. Again, I'm not trying to be gross or like some kind of weird sci-fi movie, but they just start splashing into piles of blood. And yeah, it's going to be a gory time of significant judgment, as we see when we get to chapter 19, that it's with the sword of his mouth, the sharp sword of his mouth, that they're judged. But I don't think that either of those are meant to be closed end. It doesn't seem that we fight. It seems like we're just there to witness, and yet we might. I wouldn't mind going into battle behind Jesus with our new undying bodies.
You're pretty confident.
Very confident. And yet, we just don't know. But we do know that everyone's involved. So, yeah. Any other observations?
It's just a neat picture that I appreciate how you looked back on God's interaction with people in the past, and it's a horrible scene in terms of justice, but you also see God who's so beyond merciful in extending patience and desire to see restoration. That this happens by necessity of God's character, and there's just a real, I don't know, really neat thing of God's character that he would the balance of his justice and his mercy.
Well, and again, I think it's important to put ourselves in that mindset of the people who are going to be going through this. This is Zechariah 14, which is another of the phenomenally clear passages that talk about the end times return of Christ. But it says, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravaged. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So we'll look at this and line this up. But part of the campaign of Armageddon involves the Antichrist forces gathering around Jerusalem and being victorious. And they're going to be brutal. They're going to murder. They're going to rape. They're going to burn. It is going to be the most disgusting example of human sinfulness completely unleashed. And then they're going to gather up and move forward into this battle. It says, "And then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle, and the day of his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move towards the north, and half of it towards the south." So again, this picture. Let's keep going. "And you shall flee through my mountain valley, and the mountain valley shall reach Azel. Yes, you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. Thus the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you." So this is such a cool passage. But we want to note, this is in the Hebrew Bible. And they knew that this was a messianic thing. And yet it doesn't say the Messiah will come. It says the Lord. It is Yahweh will come. He will come. And it says his feet are going to stand on the Mount of Olives, right? So it is interesting because obviously this is a time of judgment, but we need to remember that this is going to be a joyous time. This is sin being rid from the earth. I mean, we would all love to see, right? If we could snap our fingers and make peace on earth right now, wouldn't we do it? Of course, right? By any, seemingly by any means. But the truth of the matter is that there cannot be peace on earth until it is rid of sin, right?
It's the moment that Thanos wanted perfect balance.
Yes. That's it. And see, that's the problem, right? I mean, given the funny thing, Thanos, right, is just getting rid of half. But what Jesus is going to get rid of substantially is sin on earth. Mm-hmm. He's going to throw away Satan, lock away, we should say, Satan for 1,000 years. And the sin nature will be the human sin nature of those who go into the millennial kingdom will be the only vestiges of sin on this earth, governed finally by the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Finally, tyrannical, evil, wicked governments not being allowed to get away with it ever again. I mean, the more I learn about history, the more disgusted I am even with our government. The things that we and other, again, Western governments have allowed in the name of science or progress or eugenics or whatever this is. And it's vile, it's repugnant, it's disgusting. And to know that will be wiped away forever and more. I mean, that, while it is sorrowful that these have to be judged, no one's brought them to this place of judgment but themselves, right? I mean, you can't say that there is any reason for them to continue to cling to Satan and cling to their sin other than a pure, arrogant hatred of God. So, again, not to be unmerciful, but ultimately, when the Lord comes to the end of his grace and mercy, I think we're going to run out of pity and compassion as well, in a good sense. This will be a moment of great celebration. And the people who go through this tribulation, who will have seen and been persecuted and pursued around the world, have seen brutal martyrdom of those whom they love and the cruel treatment of Israel, they will rejoice to finally see that washed off of the earth forever. So, again, I think it's just important that we maintain that view, and it's kind of interesting that sometimes we will gain a pity or a viewpoint of having a pity or a compassion that we think is somehow greater than God's. You know what I mean? Like, that's inappropriate.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way that our sympathies tend to go. It's all a context-setting thing, because if you're in a court of law and someone has murdered someone, you don't have sympathy toward that person. You don't at all want them to go away scot-free.
Yeah.
There's almost something inherently wrong about that kind of sympathy toward that person in that moment, the obscuring justice in that. So it really is a context thing, and a matter, like you mentioned earlier again, of the seriousness of sin and how superficial we think it really is, but how serious it is to God.
I just think it's interesting, like now, people, I feel like people's attitudes are, someone has done something wrong and you still want to feel sorry for them anyway. You still want to let them off the hook anyway. You still want to people want to try and look at it, let's try and look at it from their point of view, and it's just like, I don't know, but like, there is no such, I think a lot of people, now they don't want justice or whatever, it's, they just want, they don't want there to be any, I can't think of how to say what I'm trying to say. I just, like, if I look at that Nextdoor app, do you ever read that?
Yeah.
Someone did something and something bad or whatever, and the people's comments were like, did you ever look at it from his point of view?
Yeah.
It's like, what are you talking about?
He gave rat poison to the other guy's dog to kill it. Like, that's
Right.
not an okay thing to do. Yeah, I mean, that was one that I read on Nextdoor where someone had poisoned this person's dog and they were rightfully, justifiably mad at it. Well, did your dog this, that? Like, no, nothing justifies trying to murder someone's dog.
I feel like there's a lot of that it just seems like there's more and more of that where, I don't know, it's like, there is no right or wrong. Even if someone's wrong, you're still going to try and figure out a way to make them right. It's like,
yeah, no, and it shows that horrifying nature of what would happen, right, if God was not righteous and just.
Yeah.
We think about a God or a world in which God was not loving and gracious. And that's horrifying because we'd all be condemned, right? But if you think about a God that is not righteous and just, that is equally as horrifying.
Yeah.
Because without that, there's no standard for how we should treat one another. It just becomes a horrifying brawl for dominance, right? By might makes right. If there's no standard of true righteousness, if God isn't truly 100% righteous, that's actually a far more terrifying world, or as terrifying a world as a God who lacks love and mercy, right? And that's why I think it's so valuable to recognize that the God revealed to us in the Bible, the God revealed to us in the person of Jesus Christ, is truly the only God that satisfies. Because if we were to design our own, he would be all one way or all the other, or like I say, we'd probably at this point in our godless and disgusting culture like to unmake God altogether so we can just be our own standard in every situation. And yet,
no, absolutely, that's what people want.
And it's horrifying.
For sure.
And it will bring its own punishment tragically. But it shows us again this, and it's really important that we keep this in mind. It's interesting to me how many people are so turned off by the judgments of God in the conquest, right? Say, wow, your God killed whole villages of people, even the children and the women. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can talk about all the details that, that are overlooked in that statement, the assumptions that we're making, but finally and most importantly, he's God.
Yeah.
And he has the right to judge sin whenever and however pleases him according to his full character and absolute sovereignty and infinite knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah. He's right.
Right.
At the end of the day, he's right. Whatever we think is wrong.
Absolutely.
If we disagree with him, we're wrong.
That's right. Because why is he having to judge sin? Because we brought sin into the world, first of all, right? And then, let's just imagine a person smokes 3 packs a day, and then over time, they develop lung cancer, right? That's what you tend to get. And then what does the doctor have to do in order to deal with that? To help treat that?
Stop smoking.
Well, first of all, stop smoking. And then he's going to have to do something. Maybe you have to get can we transplant lungs? We can do that, right? Maybe you have to do chemotherapy. Either way, no matter what you have to do, it's going to be an unpleasant experience. Is the doctor the bad guy for having to go in and remove a tumor, or is the doctor the bad guy for having to administer the chemotherapy treatment? Is he the evil one? No. You brought the cancer on yourself in this very specific illustration. He has to inflict pain in order to hopefully improve or save the patient's life. And so similarly, there are some horrifying things that had to be done or have to be done by God in order to right the incredible, weighty wrong of our sin against an eternally righteous God. And so it's kind of funny that we get indignant. Like, I can't believe you had to kill some people to do this. He's going, oh, you have no idea. Right?
Right.
I mean, right, it does. And it kind of back to Ben's point. We cannot fully grasp the gravity of what sin is and what sin means. Right. From the little white lie that we tell ourselves or tell someone else, all the way up to the most horrific, Hitler mass murder of millions. We do not understand, even though we would weight those things differently, say, well, we understand there's a lot of gravity over here on the Hitler side. We don't understand that what offending the righteous character of God really is. And praise God, we have his word to hopefully reorient ourselves, to recognize, like, wait a minute, he is the judge. He is the one who holds this whole thing together. And while we, might think, it's, just a little thing, he understands the eternal significance of what happens when we try to do life or live life apart from him. And so as much as these judgments from, again, a pure human perspective might seem harsh, they're joyous. They're an act of God's ultimate and amazing mercy and love, because while he did ultimately have to judge those who rejected him, he saved everybody who would receive that gift. He saved everybody who could be saved or would be saved by their willingness to trust in him. It's a really remarkable thing, because the just thing to do, if you want to use the word just, right, the right thing to do would have been to snuff Adam and Eve out the minute they sinned. But instead, we have this whole story of his self-revelation. So we were going to be done early, but now we're just done on time. Let's close with a word of prayer. Father, how we thank you for your revelation of yourself. It reminds us of how small we are. Lord, how much we don't have the full picture. The full picture wouldn't fit in our heads. It would destroy us. And yet, Lord, you have revealed yourself to us that we might know you and come to know you more. To know how wonderful, how gracious, how glorious, how perfect, how righteous, how powerful, how wise. And in so doing, Lord, to recognize how humble we stand before you as your creatures, as your creations. How much more humbled for the fact that we know that we could deserve only your wrath, and yet you provided for us your love, your mercy, and your salvation in your Son, Jesus Christ. Might we ever live in a growing recognition of your perfect provision for us in your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen.